Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our second event for Forward 6, which is focused on climate. Today, we're going to be talking about climate artists and residents with our wonderful panel of all these wonderful folks whose faces you see on the screen and who we will introduce shortly. See folks slowly joining us. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and just get started. So my name is Mallory Rukhsana Nizam. Pronouns are she, her. I am just introducing this wonderful issue of Forward today and to share a little bit about the folks who helped to make this happen. And then I will take us a little deeper into Forward 6, the issue on climate, just so we know kind of what's bringing us here today. So this event is co-hosted by Forecast, Public Art, and CAIR Lab, which is a cross-sector artists and residents lab, of which I am a co-founder. And Forecast is a nonprofit that publishes this publication called Forward, which this issue is about climate. So who's Forecast? Forecast is a nonprofit that really focuses on justice, health, and human dignity and how public art advances that. They work all around the country. Work all around the country, but are based in the Twin Cities, and has a great team that is also based out of the Twin Cities, but dispersed throughout the country. It's got core staff and then a lot of different consultants and many artists that help to make all of their work come to life. Forecast has a creative studio, which does a lot of work directly with artists and to support the work of artists. Also has a planning and engagement practice, which does things like help to create cultural plans, creative placemaking plans. And again, that happens all around the country. There's a learning institute. So this is a space where folks can gain skills. So artists can gain skills around how to take their practices into the public realm. Public art administrators can gain skills and can learn more about cross-sector practice. There's also something called the Change Lab, and Forward is also associated with that kind of practice at CAS, which looks at how to push the field of public art to really imagine kind of at the edges and borders of its traditional practice. And a lot of that work really focuses on advancing justice in public art. And then lastly, the series that we're featuring here today is the Forward series, which is a digital publication. So it's built on, if you ever heard of Public Art Review, which was a beautiful print publication, this is built off of that and is a digital publication and really focuses on how artists are the vital, are problem solvers and are helping to address the vital issues of our time. So we started Forward really out of the pandemic, and that first issue was on public health. We've had a focus on transportation. We've had issues on housing, many other issues. Today, we're talking about our latest issue, which is on climate. So this issue, this is just a snapshot of what you'll find in the issue on climate. If you haven't yet looked at it, it's a great publication with a lot of stories and tools. We'll talk about some of those today. It dives into the different roles that artists play in climate, things like amplifying urgency, communicating complicated information in ways that people can understand and take action on, innovating around preparedness, community-led solutions, many other things that we know artists play a vital role in. And then within this issue, there's a variety of case studies that really focus on what we saw cities specifically most challenged by, which were air pollution, heat extremes, floods, and population displacement. And that's how the issue is organized, as well as a toolkit, which gives folks who really want to learn how to do some of this work more, some actionable resources to utilize. And it also has a public art now section, which features leading voices in public art of this exact moment, along with a dream job that artist Benny Starr wrote, who is on our panel today, and some other great pieces of writing. And you'll be able, when you explore this issue, to really dig into each of these topic areas and then dive into some of the deeper stories around things like heat extremes, floods, population displacement, and air pollution. So that's the forward issue. And now I want to kind of transition us to our panel today. So our panel is going to be moderated by Johanna Taylor, who is an associate professor at ASU, Arizona State University, and a co-founder of the cross-sector artists in residence lab, CAIR Lab. Johanna is the moderator, and she's a hybrid scholar and arts administrator whose work explores how artists and designers are working together to expand democratic actions in arts institutions. And we're so glad to have Johanna here moderating today. Johanna is going to take the mic and share a little about our panel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Roxana. I am very excited to be here today based on it draws upon my own research as well as my work with Roxana and our other colleague, Amanda Lovely, as co-founders of CAIR Lab, which stands for Cross-Sector Artist and Residence Lab. We worked with Forecast to organize this panel, so thank you to Forecast for extending this invitation. We're really interested in building capacity to support more work and conversations about embedding artists across sectors, and climate is something we care passionately about. In this issue, Forecast says that they're interested in making the case for why public artists are critical partners for climate resilience. And each of the panelists that have been brought here today are working on a different aspect of this work as artists, as planners in different capacities. And I'm really honored to be sharing this space with them today. So thank you for being here. Our first panelist is Benny Starr. Benny is a South Carolina Low Country artist whose creations embody roots in Black music, Southern culture, hip hop, gospel, blues, and rock. In 2020, he was welcomed by the U.S. Water Alliance as their inaugural artist in residence and later became Senior Fellow of Arts and Culture. Benny was named one of GRIST's 50 Fixers of 2021, a list of emerging climate leaders nationwide. He now runs Watercolor Creative, a consulting focusing on artistic projects, creative strategy, and social practice work. Next, we have Maura Jarvis, who is an award-winning water communication specialist and a One Water superhero. Maura leads community engagement and HBCU partnerships as program manager for Equitable Infrastructure at the U.S. Water Alliance. She previously spent 7 years working with the Philadelphia Water Department's Public Affairs Division. There, she led community outreach, served as their superhero mascot, Water Woman, and she specializes in connecting culturally with residents. She finds joy in exploring the role that art and creative interventions play in engaging communities in conversations around water equity and climate resilience. Next, we have Stowe Len, who is an interdisciplinary artist whose recent work has centered on collaborations with abused landscapes and municipal agencies. The cross-disciplinary nature of Len's work has included printmaking with polluted waterways, 3D scanning in the Fresh Kills landfill, recycling waste into art materials, and hosting performances at Superfund sites. He has been the public artist in residence at the New York City Department of Sanitation and the first artist in residence at Alex Renew Wastewater Treatment Facility in Virginia. Our final panelist is Barry Capard, who leads the MAPC Public Health Department and supervises the agency's regional and local public health department projects, as well as the department's health in all policies and healthy community design projects. Barry has over 18 years of planning and public health experience and has advanced the agency's public health and planning practice. contributing to state policy development and implementation, and participatory engagement research and action projects. So thank you all for joining us today. As you can tell, each of these panelists has quite a range of professional expertise and ways that they've been working to bridge across arts and creative practices in building towards climate resilience. So I'm very excited to learn from you all today. I feel at the core of this work, it is about cross-sector collaboration and recognizing that we all must come together and bringing our different skill sets and expertise and finding ways to communicate to tackle some of the deep climate crises, from air pollution to extreme heat to flooding, and that now is the time to address these issues and talk about how artists and residents can activate the work differently and build towards climate resilience in micro and macro ways. So to kick off this conversation, I have a question for each of you that invites you to share kind of how you are working on this this critical issue. And I think that will help our audience understand the work of artists and residents in cross-sector spaces. So first, Benny, you were the inaugural artist in residence at the U.S. Water Alliance. And this is a really important nonprofit that is working on tackling water challenges across the country. And this role that you had was really exciting for those of us in the field that were excited to see the work develop and emerge, because it really became a touchstone to show what was possible when an artist entered into a space and was really embedded in that work. But I can't imagine what that must have been like for you as the person that was going about it for the first time. What was that experience like, and how did you navigate it as the first artist on this team that is working on water issues?
Thank you for that question, Joanna. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you and all of my fellow panelists. I think it was, now in hindsight, looking back at it, it happened actually also during the pandemic. So it was in the heart of 2020. I believe my residency started around October or September of 2020. And there was a lot of angst, of course. There was a lot of fear. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as an artist, though we work with those things quite frequently, it was exponentially greater, not just with myself, but with everyone around me. And I think coming into that residency, sometimes the most innovative, and I've come to this realization, sometimes the most innovative thing that you can do is to get back to the basics. And instead of trying to find this new and innovative thing that I will try to do during the pandemic, when we are all on Zoom and we can't be together and we can't gather, and the power of our gathering can manifest into the things that usually push our society and culture forward. It was to get back to the basics of focusing on how are you, who are you, why are you in this work? So it boiled down, a lot of it boiled down to utilizing and tapping into, number one, creative process and the impact of culture. And when I say culture, I mean thinking of culture as the operating system, so to speak, by which we live. You know, how we talk to each other, how we identify, shared language, our norms. Getting back down to that. And that led me to my own artistic process, breaking it down into a methodology form. But what constant iteration got me to a really foundational element of what it means to be creative and who gets to own that, and the role that creativity at its most powerful, robust function, what role it plays in our society and in our work, which then pushes us to ask, how are we in relationship with the things that impact this work? How are we in relationship with our environment, the natural and built environment? How are we in relationship with many forms of justice and labor and ownership and even spirituality? And so being able to engage my staff at U.S. Water Alliance in a way that prioritized those types of questions, to even question the culture within the organization before we even think about the culture outside of the organization that got us into the problems that we're all trying to solve right now.
Thanks, Benny. I think that's really radical to this concept of get back to the basics, especially when you're talking about institutions that care passionately about the work, but have been doing it for a while. So to clarify, you were inviting the staff to think about how they were doing. How did they receive that initially?
I think it was the benefit. I always feel very lucky to be an artist and be a creative person, because we utilize what we have and we learn how to meet those anyone where they are oftentimes. And I think it was looking back on it, it was pretty radical just to not come in and say, I'm going to somehow get you all or teach you all how to play the drums, or I'm going to do something like this. To talk to them about who are you before this work begins, and who do you envision yourself being after this work ends, and how do we then get there? Being able to encourage them around the ideas of exploratory research and ideation, and what it means like to actualize your own creativity within the community in which you are working with every day, and how do we reflect on that, integrate the learnings. And the response was overwhelming, because I think everyone else during that time was feeling the pressure, the stress, the angst, the uncertainty of the obstacles that they were trying to solve, while all in some capacity figuring out how are we just going to be okay right now, because this is uncharted territory. So it was received really well. To my surprise, and a bit not to my surprise, it was received really well.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's great that it was received well, and it's gone on to inspire other people and other organizations. So Maura, you come to this from a different position. You're more embedded within the institution and are definitely in a space of creating change through the work that you do, both in terms of your own creative work as well as a communications specialist. I know from my work with CAIR Lab that kind of the person that is in the space of bridging conversations between artists and people that are working within the organization is like really difficult work. We talk about people as being translators or unicorns in building some of these bridges. And I see you is working in this unicorn space. So from where you sit, how have you experienced that happening? Like, have you seen that work of translation and bridging? And how do you see your role within these artist residency spaces?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. I was laughing because it just feels it's like fun and funny to be called a unicorn, but I mean, I understand but it's great. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think the first thing is, I guess, just thinking still about that word of like translator or communicator. It does make us feel like we're very rare, few in numbers, like it's a resource that there's not enough of. And I think it doesn't have to be that way. A feeling that I've developed over time, like I will say, when I first started working at the Philadelphia Water Department, I loved the idea of being a translator. I was like, the engineer is going to tell me this and I'm going to spit it out like that, and it's going to be amazing. And that's actually like not really the best thing in the world. I feel like the thing that will break down, like there really shouldn't be a need for a translator, truly. Like I think that we really, I don't want to call it a solution, but I think the bridge to move forward is that having the expectation that we can't all come to the table using our own jargon and just like thinking that everybody's supposed to pick up what we're putting down, basically. First, I think we need to develop a common understanding and a shared language so that we do hear each other. And so that it's not like, oh, well, like I've literally been in rooms where I've heard engineers say, oh, an artist said that, I don't speak their language. It's not even gonna absorb into me what they're saying. And that's just like not a cool way of operating, period. But how the essence of everything that we need to do in climate work relies on collaboration, and that's not a collaborative spirit at all. So I appreciate the title of translator, but I do hope that at some point in the future, it's not like that anymore. But I think the thing that I can, sort of bring to a process is that I can bring everybody to that table and facilitate the environment where we can create that common understanding and that shared language, so that we're talking to each other in a way that we've agreed doesn't require translation and that we really hear each other. And then we can sort of establish just a new way of working together and where it doesn't feel so siloed. That's a really frustrating aspect of some of the work that we do, when we know that climate work specifically is inherently collaborative. We need partnerships. We need to sort of cross barriers and bring different industries together. And so we need to develop a new framework for how we work together. And that first starts off with understanding each other and being able to just simply even talk together. How can we solve problems if we can't even, communicate and talk through things? So, and I think the biggest thing that I have been thinking about too, in the context of your question, is just not making assumptions. I feel like artists can be so misunderstood. And part of the challenge with working with people who don't traditionally work with artists is that they come into the situation with a lot of assumptions. And I have to admit, like even myself and perhaps some artists too might come into a situation with assumptions about what they think of technical staff, like planners or engineers. And so, I just think, having that understanding and building a foundation to work together in a new way, free of judgment, is really important, and just creating that shared language so that we can just talk together and make things happen.
I love that. And also the way you're framing it, it makes me feel really hopeful that, like, I don't know if you think that we've already started this new phase of development where we don't need this translation work, or some of us are already there. Like that's really powerful. Seems like the change is happening.
Because of people like Benny and Stowe, I believe that to be true.
Great. Well, then we have the right group of people here today to inspire more people to get on board and to inspire those of you on this call to keep doing the work you're doing. So Stowe, your name was just mentioned. So you've really become, have been creating a name for yourself nationally amongst this group and with other people, is someone that's really been doing exciting change-based work within different civic agencies, often related to climate. So what is the unique perspectives or possibilities that an artist and residents in these spaces can bring, and how is that work then foundational to building climate resilience?
Those are really good questions, and I have to say I related to both what Benny was saying and what Maura was saying. Maura was mentioning being a translator. And I think a lot about language, and art, I think, can be a language that isn't about speaking, and it's about kind of talking about hard to talk about things, right? So in a lot of ways, I kind of think art has the potential to be a universal language, and whether that's, visually or in song or rhythm or poetry, it's a way of, kind of speaking to, the masses as well as internally to the agency, what we're doing here, what we're processing. I think the climate crisis is hard to process. It's overwhelming. A lot of times it's hard to really talk about, and so I think art can sort of be, in a way, that type of translator. And also I think internally, Benny mentioned how he was posing these really beautiful questions to the agency itself. A lot of times these agencies, people are working, right? And they don't have time to reflect. And I think a lot of times what I've felt in my own personal experience is that I've been able to almost hold up a mirror and show what was happening and what the labor was actually like, to the people doing the job. And so, I think building building climate resilience is all about communication and collaboration, you know, and it's all about being able to allow an artist to sort of enter that institution and kind of you know, internally make change as well as be that bridge to the public in ways that are unconventional, you know, in ways that are not just, you know, statistics or data or whatever kind of educational outreach there might be. You know, we're going to come in and think about things that you've maybe never thought about, you know. And so for me, like I think oftentimes I've entered these situations with a really open mind. Like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it's all about getting to know each other. It's all about, you know, being able to feel like you're free in the process, right? To create and collaborate.
Thanks for that. There's definitely some themes in what you've been sharing to what Benny was saying about like the kind of internal work and the way you're talking about mirroring back to the organization. I think that's really powerful. I think we're identifying some themes about what the artist can do. So Barry, then I think you're coming at this from a different perspective as being the planner who's working with artists. And I think planning in particular has been a space where we've seen a number of different collaborations with artists and a willingness to do some of these internal get back to basics kind of work that the artists were suggesting. So how do you see that relationship from your side as a planner? What is the relationship like with the artist in residence? And how do you see that relationship or that collaboration bridging work that Stowe was just talking about as impacting climate-focused work?
Yeah, and thank you, Joanna, too. Thanks, Mallory, for a chance to be on here too, and really honored to be among everybody right now who's speaking and sharing. Yeah, I'll just continue that theme. Is like, I think it's just that reconnecting factor that comes out a lot in this work, and so I think there's a real tendency, for whatever reason, that when we become more specialists in what we do on the technical side, and Maura, you may have seen this, so like just when people really focus on a particular thing, it's wonderful they have that passion and focus on it. But when they begin to see water as disconnected from people, or they see that's happening on a street disconnected from the people that are using that street, or essentially what somebody might be experiencing in extreme temperatures, or the kind of upstream effects or downstream effects of climate change, like food insecurity, economic insecurity, wealth removal from people, like all those things are still echoing through. It's very easy as somebody who's an urban planner, I think, to just look at those things of like, well, we're making conditions so that there can be more housing, or we're making conditions set so there can be more streets and sidewalks, but not really thinking at all about kind of really the use case and the kind of personal lived experience in it. And I would say that's what a lot of the artists that we've had the real benefit. And I'd want to give a shout out to my colleague Anis, who's really been kind of driving a lot of that here at MAPC. But like that piece of it is so important. And I think about kind of the point Stowe is making, that essentially it can be very easy just kind of drift into those worlds, and like to be pulled back and to have the mirror shown back so that you see what that context you're in is incredibly important. And I think often, as much as we think about climate as like a new moment that we're in, I think very similar to the pandemic, it just is just putting everything in starker relief of what exists within our systems, and essentially whether it's those historical things or whether it's those things that are presenting in the moment, and echoes of essentially those either kind of discriminatory or other kind of practices that have happened that really have put people at a really kind of an unjust disadvantage in the process. And so that I think the artists do an incredible job of. And then I would say we've incredibly benefited by folks spending time with the urban indigenous population we have in Boston. So we don't in Massachusetts have really many places where there is kind of homelands that are protected for indigenous populations, but for Native Americans in areas, and kind of really lifting that up, because that's actually a history that feels like it'll be incredibly important to our future. And whether or not essentially that generosity and kindness can be shown to people who weren't maybe so generous and kind going back, to think about what the future means in terms of how we live and kind of under new conditions, but within the environment that we're in here too. So thanks.
Thanks, Barry. I think that's a really good point you're making about kind of changing the conditions, changing what's possible from inside. So I think each of you have just shared little bits about kind of like, how do you change the conditions or kind of set the foundations? What does it look like as we're instigating this change? So now I'd like to kind of shift the conversation a little bit to then say, all right, we're inspired. You've sold us. Like, we need artists to like make this work happen. Great. But then what does this actually look like? So I have some questions for you kind of about like the nature of this collaboration so that the people that have joined us today can understand this a little bit better. So Stowe, in thinking about your work in these different agencies, do you have an example of how you were able to connect with the staff in order to advance a project that maybe wouldn't have happened if you weren't an independent artist, right? Like, lots of artists are doing work related to climate, and mainly they're doing it in other spaces, right? It's a lot of it is mapped in the forecast issue. They're not necessarily working directly with organizations in this space. So what does it mean to be working with the staff, and what's an example of what that looked like in order to make the work? And so how did that happen in creating the work? What did it mean to be working with them rather than working independently?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I can think of so many examples actually. When I started with the sanitation department in New York, it was really important to me to not be a voyeur, to not be cosplaying sanitation worker, like I wanted to be as real as possible with everyone. So, I just showed up and I got on sanitation trucks and embedded myself in the waste stream. And these are folks who they're really, really face to face with our waste, and see it and deal with it and pick it up. So, I think in that process of really allowing myself to be amongst them without a real kind of ulterior motive other than just to learn and listen, and then eventually I would respond. I didn't know what I was going to do. So all the projects kind of came out of that experience. It came out of conversations. It came out of these experiences. At every step of the way, like when it comes to waste removal, and the folks who are working on recycling and sustainability issues and composting. There's in this department, it's the world's largest sanitation department, right? There's 10,000 employees, so you've got every kind of person you can imagine working on these issues. And I mean, one thing that comes to mind is and this goes back to that reflecting potential that artists can do. I love exploring the buildings. In New York, there's like 200 different facilities. So I used to really use my artist in residence as a backstage pass to really kind of get in there, and poking around, I found an old TV studio, a sanitation and television studio that some people knew about, but no one had kind of really went in there to investigate what was in there. So when I came upon that, people said, "Oh yeah, it's old footage of the sanitation department. None of it probably plays. We might throw it out." I got in there and what I discovered was hundreds of films and videos, some of them dating back to 1903, that show the process of sanitation in New York City. But it also shows the process of the growth of a city. It shows ecological awareness, recycling, all these things. So it's like a total historical archive. And so I began to digitize this stuff, and the department has these flat screen TVs in all their buildings. So I started to show what I was digitizing on the screens and create my own videos with that footage. And so it was a way to talk to 10,000 employees, actually, was through the video screens, and use the lineage of this department and this job to sort of put a context into the labor. I think it's important for us to sort of see this lineage, right? And where we are, where we've come from, and where we need to go. So that was really incredible. None of that obviously would have happened if I didn't have access to the department and was allowed and given, entrusted to go into these spaces. And I ended up digitizing 500 hours of footage. that's now like in their own archive, and and I'm continuing to work with that footage to make a film. So it was a way to connect with the workforce, share and show their history, create a dialogue about it, and then of course also share that with the public. So I hate to think it might have gotten all thrown out, or who knows, but that's one big example.
That's a great example. Thank you for sharing. You definitely, definitely weren't just cosplaying sanitation worker. It sounds like you were really recognized as a part of the system. I know amongst my CAIR Lab collaborators, we strongly think that artists need to have that level of access that you had that can get you in that back door, right? Like you needed that sanitation email address and that key card in order to do that work and really connect with people in the work they were doing every day.
Yeah, and it made me feel good. As an artist, I felt like I was seen and supported and trusted. I think which is so important. And in turn, I was like all in.
Definitely. I mean, because that's the way that the agency could get the best work out of you too, right? It's like it's a mutual relationship based on trust and mutual respect. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess based on that, then Benny, you've also been in this space for a while. And I know at CAIR Lab, we really think that like durational residency is like having someone being able to build that relationship with the staff in a space with the community constituents over a longer period of time can lead to bigger change overall. Do you have an example that you could share with us of something that sort of evolved out of that durational time? I mean, maybe it was something small that got bigger, or like, what did it mean to have this level of time commitment?
That's a great question. I think relationships are relationship, and the constant questioning of how we are in relationship, especially coming from the standpoint of, being an artist, being a Black artist, also being a Black artist from the South, thinking about how we are in relationship with each other. Is this relationship one of exploitation? Is my labor being exploited? Is this a reciprocal relationship? Is this meaningful and intentional, thoughtful relationship and partnership? That has always been very important. So I tried to go into my residency and even the senior fellow work constantly thinking about relationship as it pertains to culture and process. And I really struggle sometimes with like saying, this is a good thing that I've done. But I think sometimes the largest impacts come from the most, what we may consider the cavalier interactions that lead to real relationship building. So for my colleagues who were working on things like water shutoffs, there were a lot of cross pollination within the organization that I had the freedom to work with other staff working in different areas at that time at the U.S. Water Lines. Some folks were working on water shutoff projects. Some folks were working on access issues. Some folks were working on net zero. So being able to build those kind of relationships with them where I can change or impact the way we even think about how we gather. Think about at a time when everyone was on Zoom for everything. That was usually the only way we could meet. We would jump on Zoom and everybody would say, okay, let's get down to the runner show. This is a runner show in a meeting. And oftentimes when people have experienced trauma, when people have experienced oppression, discrimination, and all the things that come along with that, sometimes you just need a space to gather and exist and know that you can be felt, know that you can be seen, know that you can be heard, and a beginning to a process of healing can even be something that can be imaginable. And the way in which that translates from how we do work within an organization can directly translate from one person who may be organizing a meeting or an engagement with community. Yeah, we don't think we always have to stuff the agenda. For an example, stuff the agenda with things without allowing an opportunity for things to breathe and for people to process and think about how they feel and think about their own identity and experience and how it encounters what is being presented to them. And that kind of goes back, I'll finish this off with saying, I could point to things that occurred the One Water Summit, which the U.S. Water Alliance does every year, and how we infuse and integrated arts and culture into that, work with Texas water utility staff from across the state of Texas, built around these core principles of creativity and storytelling as they're looking to solve water challenges in their state. But what I will really say is it gets back to the idea of who gets to own creativity. That is something that we all get to own because it is a subversive tool. It is a natural predator to power when we see it in its full, robust function. And if we're willing to accept the definition of creativity, never separated from process, but also as the encounter with our world by the deeply conscious human being that thrusts them into processes of bringing something new and of value into existence. And that's not just reserved for the eccentric, the artists. That is something that everybody has the power to weaponize and actualize. And that's necessary for collaboration, imagination, innovation. Let's get back on a granular level to what it means to be a creative and the power and the function of creativity at its core.
That's really powerful. It sounds like through you being vulnerable about your own positionality and wanting to counter expected structures, that you were opening up spaces for the staff to navigate their own day-to-day differently as well. So what does that look like now, 4 years later? Has that left a influence on how things are functioning? Not just checking the boxes up the run of show, as you mentioned?
I can see the difference. I can see the difference in how people gather, on how not only what you ground this gathering in, but the impetus that falls on the person to do their due diligence, and not just even, we have to be honest, in this world that we're living in right now, even in this sector, storytelling can sometimes feel like low-hanging fruit. Storytelling to what end? Storytelling as a means to give people or to support people in their long-standing desire to be self-determinant, to be free, to be liberated. It changes the conversation on, are we working to, I would love to see a world at some point where we work to not have to have these certain entities being the translator, like Maura alluded to. So that is normalized working with an artist. It is normalized being able to tap into our creativity, and creativity, culture, all these things has a place in this work, and it shouldn't even be second guessed. And that work continues, but I can see that in people who are at the organization now doing good work like Maura, those who have expanded their work and who have moved to other organizations in the way they think about planning, organizing, and even advocacy work.
That's really motivational. Thank you. I think this focus on relationships and connections with people, and like the how being embedded over time can really make an impact is really important. And I see the work, Barry, that MAPC is doing some of that work. Like there have been these connected, embedded relationships with artists over time. So why, from a planning standpoint or an institutional standpoint, is this work of continuing those relationships and doing some of that micro change work important? Why is it important to MAPC?
First, I have to say, I have to think about organizing a MuniCon now based on Stowe's comment about where people get to dress up as their favorite municipal. That's really, I like that a lot. So yeah, I guess it's important, and thanks, Benny, for speaking to the relationship piece, because I just think it's so vital in the way you're talking about it, and the space that's really important for a relationship to flourish too. And so I think it's been important for us, and I was trying to think about it where I think as a place that sometimes unfortunately defaults to being transactional, there's a lot of like wanting the physical, the tactile to be the thing that an artist is doing. And I've seen our team do that. And I would imagine like a lot of our work early on as we began to work with artists was that kind of like physicality of it too. What is it that exists in the world? If it's a creation, if it's something else. But I have seen essentially over time that has then given the ability to kind of reach back further and then say essentially, well, like, how are we doing that particular part of the work, which I've then seen be transformative and essentially kind of how we're doing that work to produce the things. We haven't lost the physical thing, but we've gotten better about what is those things that we are creating and why we're creating them. And then I think that last piece of like, well, why did you choose to do that? And I think that's the part of it that's been really helpful. And I think a lot of us have found it really important to work with artists on staff because now we see that entire envelope of what is possible. And so the trajectory of projects or the trajectory of efforts change. Who we're working with because of that how question is being altered because of it. And then what we're putting out in the world looks different because I think, Benny, like the way you said it, that like creativity can be a predator for power. Like, I think that is something that we can now emanate, and we're still an institution, like any large thing is shifting, but you can see those beginning ripples in that shift that's echoing and kind of asking those questions. And I honestly, I don't know if we get there without artists being in the process with us, because we would be too much in our own world and too much, again, to Benny's point of like, so focused on the run of the show instead of creating space to understand how and why we should be turning to. And so I think a lot of us see that. And for those of us who might be in positions where we can kind of direct some of the work, we're kind of looking for more and more ways to bake that into our work.
So has that work then shifted your reputation with other planning agencies or with artists because you've been doing it for a while? Have you been kind of seeing external partners recognizing the internal changes?
Yeah, and it's funny, I guess maybe then there's like that secondary ripple effect externally too, where there's both kind of surprise and wonder that an organization like ours, and maybe Maura saw this as well too, of like, oh, you're engaging in this, we're really inviting in it. And then they begin to ask that same question of like, well, why are you doing it that way? And so it's been really interesting too, to kind of both internally and externally be in those worlds. But I do think the fact that we have so much to kind of demonstrate now and to show what's possible, particularly as like an agency that's regional in nature, but really is a state agency, that I think if others find it something that they can emulate themselves after too. And so, yeah, I think it's been really beneficial for those external effects.
Great. That's exciting. The change is happening. So Maura, what does this look like for you and your work? And have you been feeling some of those kind of slow ripple effects also? So sort of like, two parts to the question. One part is like, how have you been seeing this yourself? And then also based on that, just because I feel like you've worked in so many different interesting spaces, what do you have any recommendations for us in terms of how we navigate this, in terms of building it, and carrying it forward, in terms of bringing our different disciplines and way of working forward?
Sure. So to quickly and easily answer your first question, I do think that there have been ripples, as you said. I feel like when I first started working at the water department, our partnerships with artists and with nonprofits that work, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of called Mural Arts Philadelphia. It's a very well-known organization in Philadelphia. I think we're still the reigning largest outdoor art gallery in the world. I believe we got that title at one point, and I'm just running with it. I feel like when we started that work, we've had a relationship with that organization for over 10 years. When it first started, I feel like it was kind of a weird thing, and people were like, what is it actually that you guys are doing with this art thing? But now the landscape has completely changed. I feel like it is different. You do see artists in residence. It's a lot more pervasive in, especially in climate work, than of course it was before. So certainly I feel like there has been improvement. To answer your second question, I just want to call back to, oh my gosh, everybody has been dropping some serious gems right now. Like, I feel so, I'm on the panel and I'm like really inspired and like, oh gosh, you guys are saying amazing things. I want to go back to what Stowe said earlier about his experience like just the what I was going to say to answer your question about navigating and sort of recommendations, my answer that I wanted to say is immersion. That it is so important when we're talking about navigating. So on the artist side, but also from, you know, the utility, technical, whatever side, for both of us, something that I sort of liken that to is learning a new language, like a foreign spoken language. They say that the absolute hands down best way for you to become conversational, for you to become fluent, is to immerse yourself in the language, the culture, everything. And so I sort of want to carry that over to this work about sort of navigating, working between different disciplines, and how we can sort of talk to each other and collaborate, is this idea of immersion. I love what Stowe was saying about like riding on the trucks and like going through the buildings and like that kind of stuff. You need to be fully immersed in order to even conceive of what an initiative or a project might look like, or how you might want to engage with folks properly. Like get down and dirty with them, literally, and then and see really like I feel like artists can bring this, or really, if you bring any sort of outside perspective, it can bring up like new energy, new questions. Something else that I want to call out that Benny said was about, he was talking about storytelling, but like to what end? Like sometimes we're doing work just to be doing it, just to grind the meat, just because we got a grant, or because, you know, like, oh, regulations, you know, this is something that we've always done, we have to do it. And when you introduce sort of like a new element, then it brings up a lot of questions where it's like, why are we doing it that way? You know, something that you might not have ever even reflected on. I think that really is an amazing thing. And it can only, it can take an artist coming in and saying, seeing that there's a TV studio and everybody else sort of walk past it and say, oh yeah, that thing over there, wouldn't know what the heck to do with it until Stowe came along. Like that is so amazing. So I think immersion, okay, so on the artist side, artist in residence, I think is a fabulous concept, so that they can be immersed in the work that's going on in an agency. But something that I want to get across too is that it can't be one way. Like, I think also when we're talking about this disconnect between artists potentially and technical staff and the community, like, I think immersion also has to go in the other direction. And it would be, in my personal experience, I would say that it's been really powerful for like technical staff, like engineers, planners, to be able to also partake in the artistic process. Like, and it can be unforgettable to have that experience. Something that I can say with complete confidence is that, you know, I will literally never forget the first time that I heard about Stowe's work at One Water Summit in Milwaukee. Like that's something I will never forget, hearing about the things that you were doing at the sanitation department. Every time I hear Benny speak, I remember how I feel. Like you, Johanna, you said that he's mentioned that some of his words were powerful. I wanted to write in the chat, Benny's middle name is powerful. Every time that he speaks on a platform, I'm like, it gives me a feeling that I will never forget. And I think that our utility workers, our government agency workers, like they need to experience that too, or else, yeah, if you tell them that you're bringing in an artist and they're gonna like ride on your truck every day and watch you at your meetings and hang out with you guys, and they're gonna be like, well, what the heck are they gonna do? But if they experience it, then that completely changes things. It's not like I'm playing translator and saying, oh, well, this is what they intend to do, or this is, you know, this is the kind of art that they do. It's that they are immersed in it and that they can feel, you know, this is all about feeling and being immersed in an experience. And so, yeah, I feel like it has to go both ways. And that's a really wonderful, you know, thing to be able to get everybody sort of on equal playing field. I don't really like that term, but, you know, just so that we can sort of see each other. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's all that I had to say about it. Really passionate because you guys have really said some awesome things here. So
Thanks, Maura. You've got me really excited. I'm excited about the future of this work, right? We want everyone to be carrying it forward. So with that in mind, where do you all want to see an artist in residence doing climate justice work? Like Stowe or Benny, what's your dream residency? Or where do all of you, like, where do you want to see an artist in residence that's able to tackle all of these different things, or maybe in a very small way in a small space? What's the dream residency in climate? Maybe it's everywhere. CAIR Lab talks about wanting an artist at every level of government. So, but what's your dream? You're living the dream.
Maura, you were about to.
No, because you were going on and off mute. I really want you to talk first. I'll go after Benny.
You know, I want to say first off that artists doing the work within the communities that produce them is really important. And we know that. And ultimately that the goal is, or the hope is, that the communities that produce these artists that go on to have these type of opportunities will also benefit in somehow in this relationship. They are still in relationship. My small town, Pineville, South Carolina, the low country of South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Spartanburg, South Carolina, all these places that have poured into what I'm able to do. The goal is I want them, I have to actively work so that they also benefit from any breakthroughs that the artists will then accomplish or affect. And I'm also thinking about something that was said earlier, and I think Barry might have said it about, and I know Stowe talked about just siloing, and things don't happen in silos. Holistically, I'm just thinking about it, solutions. Somewhere like the National Endowment of the Arts, for me, I'm seeing over the last 2 years the way that all agencies in ways have been activated, and the power wielded on the agency level of government, coupled with the activists and the organizers who are on the ground, oftentimes pushing those agencies, oftentimes moving from the roles of being on the ground into those agencies. But how do we fully push and activate the power of those types of agencies? So when I think of somewhere like the National Endowment of the Arts and the reach that they would have in a dream residency around climate, would be activating the way we even think about art. Let us go deeper. We're in a time where the epidemic of loneliness is upon us right now. I heard our Surgeon General talk about that, the intersection of arts and public health. All of these things, how do we activate an agency like that to change, number one, how we think about creativity and artists, decoupling it from this idea of celebrity and infusing a much more holistic view that takes on the issue of climate as not something separate and apart, but something that we can find a way to organize and work to achieve the type of solutions we want to achieve. And arts being an integral part of that, as is housing, as is education, as is all the things, economic justice, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say an arts organization like National Endowment of the Arts, probably, and weaponizing that to its full capacity.
Thanks, Benny. I think that's great to tie the federal power of the agency to what's happening in local communities.
I just wanted to jump in quickly. I have like a much more stuffy answer than what Benny said, so I kind of regret going after him. But something about my role now that I have with the U.S. Water Alliance, apologies to anyone who heard my bio. My job title is Program Manager for Equitable Infrastructure. It means nothing because nobody understands what I do based off of that. It's a wonderful, beautiful title. I love it, but nobody knows what the heck I do. So just a little context for my answer is that we are now an environmental finance center, which is just a lot of words saying that we provide technical assistance to communities that are trying to access funding for infrastructure investment for water upgrades. And so what I would say, I would love to see more artists involved in the work of technical assistance providers. And so there are dozens of organizations that are working in communities across the country in developing, and these are communities that historically have been unable to access funding. They have been, you know, underinvested or not just underserved, but not served at all. And so we're working with communities and creating a vision for their future and for infrastructure that's going to serve them for generations. And I feel so strongly that artists should absolutely be a part of that process. And it would be a really fantastic sort of network because we have technical assistance or environmental finance centers all over the country in all of the regions of EPA and national ones like the U.S. Water Alliance. And it would, you know, create this very sort of sprawling network of artists working directly in communities that are actually in development processes that are going to lead to investment, which is really important. And having a creative aspect to that is in many ways, like it could be that they require like build in the sense of building trust. We might need to talk about like developing healing spaces where people just feel heard, seen, you know, that they are felt. That's really important, as opposed to going in and saying, okay, we're here to like get the money and put a pipe in. No, that's usually not how things start when you're really doing true community engagement. So I feel like there really is a huge role for artists to play in that realm that I don't think has been explored yet.
Definitely. Thank you. Stowe, it looks like you have a thought.
Oh, I'm inspired by this conversation. I love what y'all are saying. I'm so down. Yeah, I think having done some of these residencies, I want artists to be able to have this opportunity, and I want the agencies to be able to have these opportunities across the country, you know. I just would love, you know, to see that happen. Like every city, you know, should have city artists, should have agency artists in residence. And, you know, it's really amazing to meet y'all who are working on that, you know, and everywhere I go, I'm always an advocate for that, telling people how it works in New York and how, you know, I've been a part of that. So yeah, I kind of want everyone else to be able to have those opportunities too, you know. And, you know, for me, it's been really great because I was at sanitation for 2 years. Now I'm at a botanical garden in Queens, and it's, you know, there's a lot of overlap. There's compost there. The garden is actually on an old landfill. You know, there's a lot of interesting overlap, but it is a wonderful reminder to me that, you know, there's a balance in climate resiliency. You know, there's like the trash, and then there's like community work, and there's, you know, these types of different spaces to be engaged, you know, in different communities to be engaged. And that's all in my own backyard, you know, and I want artists to be able to connect to their own backyards, their own communities, you know, and I think Benny mentioned this earlier, that the idea that it shouldn't be weird, right, for there to be an artist in residence. Even in New York, you know, there's a precedent for this. And, you know, a lot of my work, a lot of my conversations was why, you know, why would you want to do this? Or why are we doing this? You know, why would sanitation want to do this? And it's I always like those conversations because it just, you know, brought up all these ideas of what art really is, or who really are artists, and what that kind of means to this whole system, and to addressing, you know, huge crazy topics like climate, you know, like the climate crisis. So yeah, anyways, you know, I'm all in for advocating for this for everybody, you know, and that's what I want to see.
Great, thank you. Barry, do you have a dream where you would like to see an artist embedded in climate work?
I think like as much as like climate, thank you for asking, John. I think as much as climate is like just this like physical issue, is just like such a social issue. And I might be going too far in my like definition of artists, but I think about what Maura said in terms of immersion. And I think about like, I've always had this dream of if there was just like a general, like kind of constantly moving anthropological team in place, and like having that connected, because one, I hope is it's creating like a face for whatever the institutions or the public agency is in that particular place, so people have more rebuilding trust in that. And what we saw coming out of the pandemic is if there's trust in the folks who are serving that place, we can just do so much more. And something that would be like just about myself is like, sometimes as crowds get bigger, I go more inside myself. Like I do less to connect because it just becomes too overwhelming for me. But anytime there's a space like this that I'm invited into where we don't know one another, but I feel so incredibly comfortable and like really just like at home and like sharing as much as I can share. If there were artists that were just kind of doing that, and I know that might be too much of a task to ask, but just that space being created more and more, all the way from communities that have experienced incredibly injustice and trauma to folks who might feel that they don't need to engage in those conversations to bring us together. I think those are the moments that climate is going to present us with, where we haven't seen before. We need to be creative. And the moment that comes next is going to need reinvention. And like having been in a space with each other where we can then do that instead of finding ourselves stalled and not being able to make that movement. And so I think something like that would be incredibly interesting, but realizing that's probably, again, to your point, more dream in terms of resource and time, but it would be fascinating for me to see what it could do in a place.
Thank you. We have to start from the space of dreaming in order to make it possible. So I'm glad that we've created a comfortable space to dream together and then all go out into the world. So in thinking about that and asking you one final short question before we turn to the Q&A, we have some good questions coming in. In order to carry this dream space forward into the world, do you have one call to action that you'd like the people on this call to take away? What do you want us to carry forward? What do you want us to do? This doesn't have to be the thing that fixes it. It could be something simple, like allow us the space to dream, which I currently feel inspired to do. What call to action do you have for us?
I think the call to action that I would have for people is that we are tasked right now. One of the many tasks that we have on us right now is to engage in a really radical reclamation of what creativity is. It's not the thing for the eccentric folks. It's not just something for artists. We are tasked with reclaiming the role of creativity in our everyday lives, and to never separate creativity from process. I know we like to think it's this fleeting fleeting moment that yields this eureka moment where it's like, someone has an album, or someone has a painting, or someone is inspired to write something. But if we are willing to accept this definition of the deeply conscious person, and conscious just meaning aware and sensitive and human, that deeply conscious person that encounters their world in a manner that allows them to be thrusted into a process that brings something new and a value into this world, it then will yield or force us, encourage us to think about what new form of relationship, what new form of love, what new form of care, what new form of relationship we have with environment, with our community, what a community is, how we feel a city should look, how we feel activism should look, could be supported. Creativity is, when it is actualized in its fullness, it is a true natural predator of power, and is one of the only ones that we have. So we are tasked with that reclamation of creativity at a fundamental level, so we can even know how to take care of the artists and how to be in real relationship with them.
Thank you. I love that. Creativity is a true natural predator of power.
See, I could listen to Benny talk all day. This is like so articulate, elegant, and, inspiring, but everything he's saying, I really feel in my heart too. And I think just simply, I guess, reimagine your relationship to place and your community, and how are you gonna plant seeds for change, because we all got something we can do.
I'm not saying from Maura, like I've just been really kind of continue to be fascinated with the concepts of like fixed and growth mindset, and just that power I think that exists in the word yet, that often I think is used in growth mindset, is like, so a little bit, Benny, to your point of like creativity or thinking about like Benny, the exploration part of it too, is like, I haven't explored things yet. Like, it's just like, I think that is such a powerful thing to say, essentially where we can go. And I just like, so I think using that word more would be my one suggestion.
How to follow. So many great things have been said. I guess I'll just cap it off with like telling everyone we're all doing amazing work. I'm sure folks listening are doing really great work and working very hard. And so perhaps I'll offer that we should all just remember to rest. Rest is resistance. Like, we are not just machines that are supposed to be working all day. And that's something that I'm reminded by when I'm consuming art or when I'm interacting with art. This is not my own original concept, but I keep seeing this kind of statement on social media about, you know, how when we're in our darkest times, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, when we're struggling, like when we crave connection, we seek out art, you know, in so many different ways, whether it's music, whether it's television, whether, you know, it's, you know, some physical medium. And I think that's so important to just emphasize that if anyone ever sort of downplays the power that art can have in these, you know, vital civic spaces, then just as a reminder, like, art is everywhere and we're constantly interacting with it, and it's so important just in our daily lives, and just never forget that. So yeah, thank you.
That's really powerful. Thank you all. I feel like you've left us with things to carry forward. So thank you all for sharing today. What you've shared is left some questions with our audience. So turning to questions, if you haven't already and you have something that you'd like to ask this panel, please put it into the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can. The first question from the audience has also gotten a response. Someone says that they are curious about the expectations of artist in residence funding agencies with respect to the impact of artist projects. Is there an expectation for the artists to record, collect data or information on the impact and how they arrived at that goal? So what are the expectations around reporting and evaluation if you get this type of money? Is this something you've had to navigate? Or is this something that the U.S. Water Alliance and MAPC have taken on?
I can speak to what was one of the things that attracted me to the residency with the U.S. Water Alliance, was that there was no, if a project or art rendering, as we describe it, came out of it, great, but that was not a requirement for the residency. And I found that really to be, I like that mainly because, number one, it was the pandemic. And, you know, I come and make a song about water, you know, like just during the pandemic. I'm not doing that. But what I think what the connection was for me was that they understood the power that it could have on processes, the power that it could have on culture, on relationship building, and all of those things relative to what was happening at the time with the One Water movement. And so those type of residencies, which I'm seeing more of, where an art project is not a requisite for the residency, but data collection, reflections, and learning, so that the funders are gathering learnings about the value added by embedding an artist within the organization. Those aspects were vital.
Definitely. I also know that being able to track that means that it's more likely you can get more money in the future, right? Create more opportunities if you can show what happens.
Yeah, in my experience, it kind of the only, I was pretty open. The process was very open for me, and what I really have to give props to the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York is that they literally said, we don't want you to know what you're gonna do. We want you to get to know the department first, you know. But then after about 5 months, I think, you know, I needed to kind of like have basically like a general idea of what was going to happen, or what I wanted to work towards. But in terms of sort of like a deliverable or something like that, it was my only constraint was that they wanted public engagement. You know, that was like very important. What that looked like, how I wanted to go about that, I was free to explore, you know, experiment and create that. So that was amazing, you know, because there's no way I would have been able to predict what I did. So I think that's something I would say is, as an artist, from my perspective, super important, you know. And I know it's hard for people to say, well, what do you mean? You know, we want you to know, like, what do we give you money for? You know, but that's the thing about art, you know, it does happen, it does evolve, it does, you know, absorb and respond and can be created in moments, you know, and is not necessarily totally able to be planned out, you know. So and I know it's not always like that, you know, but I do sort of often try to push for that situation, you know.
Yeah, that's great. It also feels like then it builds the capacity of you as an artist to be working with this institution, which is already having to measure impact and do evaluation for their own work. Okay, so the next question from the audience is someone is asking, how are Stowe and Benny finding these artist in residence opportunities? And then on the flip side, how are Barry and Maura promoting them? How do you advise artists to enter this work?
I mean, I advise them to first, it starts locally. I was only made aware, I developed a relationship with U.S. Water Alliance based on a relationship that I had with my local museum in the state of South Carolina, by way of doing work in South Carolina, being from there. And then based on that relationship, they are usually on these emails and newsletters about roles and unique opportunities for artists and cultural workers. And that was then forwarded to me. And I'm seeing a pattern of how that happens with opportunities like this. So I often and would encourage people to start locally, connect locally with your cultural institutions, your art institutions, develop that relationship, establish that relationship. And also, God, I don't want to use the word leverage because I think there's an overword, but rooted in the work that you are already doing. Because like you said, so many artists and folks are already doing work in their respective locations and communities that they may not classify as climate work, but it is. That they may not classify as this type of work, but it is. There are already people doing that work there. So connection locally with your local organizers, activists, being in relationship with them and your cultural and arts institutions as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's you know, locally is what you know, right? That's you know, people that you already know, and that's a great way to start. And once you are able to do projects or residencies locally, then you know, that's always great to be able to show for more nationally, you know, recognized programs or traveling to other places, you know. And I would say, in terms of finding stuff out, I always am scouring the internet. Everyone knows I'm interested, so all my friends are sending me stuff all the time, you know. And you know, there's like Benny said, there's all these email lists. Like Creative Capital is a grant giving organization, but they also promote other grants, you know. So I get on those kinds of email lists. I think there's one called Rachel Mead as well that has both jobs and residencies. So I get on tons of those email lists, you know. And one thing for artists to do is to, if you have artists that you really like whose work is aligning with yours, you can always look and see what residencies or grants they've gotten or done, you know. That's always a cool thing as well. But you know, I think you think about what the work is that you're doing and what's the work that you want to do. And it also doesn't hurt to go to organizations and ask them if they would be interested in creating a residency. And you can use examples of ones that are already out there and say, you know, look, you know, U.S. Water Alliance did this, you know, your part sanitation just don't you want to do it, and you can kind of try to create one too.
I'll just jump in to add, Stowe, you took the words out of my mouth. What I was going to say is that, sometimes the opportunity is not sitting there on the website ready for you to apply, but it is about, perhaps proposing something. But I guess on the sort of back end side of that, from the city side, I do think a barrier for government agencies is that because the framework is so rigid, and I from personal experience working within the Philadelphia civil service system, it can be very challenging to push through innovative positions like that. And so what I would say is that what you want to, or in perhaps proposing an artist in residence program or something like that, then thinking about those creative ways to fund the position. So I'm thinking back to an example when I was in Philadelphia, it would have been impossible to get an artist in residence position in through our civil service system. However, the water department, the cities use tons of contracts to get their actual work done. And so there might be a way to sort of slip in on, an adjacent or appropriate contract. Now, the water department is really cool, I have to say. And they already had a contract with Mural Arts. And so that would have been a very easy way for an artist to say, hey, let's do something with the water department, but I can get in on a contract that's through Mural Arts. And then that way it's not that the water department has to create a new position. It's that they're already working within a structure that exists. And then you can sort of get in that way. And it'll be easier to do that. Just wanted to touch on the question about how are we promoting these positions. It's not always that I'm pushing out like a specific position, but certainly internally, I think it's important for us to advocate for the value that artists in residence can have. And so on the back end, would love to advocate for creating new positions and for sort of planting those seeds with colleagues throughout the industry so that perhaps, from my end, I can plant the seed so that they can have the idea and perhaps implement it, or if they're approached by an artist, then maybe they're a little bit more open to it. So yeah, I think that's sort of how I'm trying to navigate it for now.
Thank you all for sharing that. There's actually a question in the chat from Kendra that I think is like the follow-up to this build your own residency kind of initiative. Kendra asks, what's the best answer to why should we have an artist in residence, and why should we do art in our cities? They work for a watershed district and are trying to do some of this work themselves. So how do you make the case, basically, if you are interested in doing this work, whether you're seeking it out as an artist or working within an institution? Sounds like it's complicated. We're thinking. I know CAIR Lab has been doing some of this work, and I think partially what we can do, and I'd love to hear from you all as well, is like sharing some of the conversations like this one and showing like kind of the rich change in these small examples that are bubbling up. Barry, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I guess I would only say mine might be modified by the audience that you're thinking about. I think sometimes there might be a default to thinking it's like data or change, but I would go back to, I think what a lot of people are touching on, it's like, how is the world a little bit different, and how is it beginning to be different by that? And I think the kind of exposition of story can be like a really, really big, powerful part of that too. And I think that's where we've seen it as well too, because we see the story repeated, or we see essentially kind of people wanting to ask more and being more exploratory about that too. And the political game of trying to support these things is just kind of at some points really silly, because it's just a way to kind of avoid answering yes. So often I think it's just trying to get to the folks where the kind of constituents and the roots will drive those who are in decision making positions to really kind of make sure that funding is there. And the only thing I would add to the previous question too is that I think, at least on the institutional side, I think we're often thinking about how we're prepared for the backslide, because whether if the economy changes or people's preferences changes and all those particular things, we can never consider these things locked in the way we would want to. So just being in partnership with those that are doing this work, so that we are holding the line and talking about how important it is, and not just thinking about, back to that reference of siloing, but we're doing this as a collective as part of it too. So maybe not as like specific an answer, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I do think the conversation about the collective is important, the collective piece of this work. Do others have thoughts about how to strategize this case making for someone looking to start a program?
I'm sorry, Benny. I'll keep it short. I was just gonna say, this is not the best answer, but I do feel, it is important to sort of acknowledge that my context for everything is within, community engagement. And I feel like for so long, so many communities have not been served in the sense of being properly engaged and having power in what happens in their community. And I think, and that means having knowledge, like being involved in processes. Like we're talking about, Kendra mentioned working for a watershed district and trying to advocate for more art. And so I'm just thinking like, if I wanted to get more people involved in my watershed district, and the traditional methods that we've been trying to engage with people haven't worked, what could it hurt, to throw some money or to partner with a community artist, somebody who has connections, somebody who might have already built trust, or somebody who can create a space to build trust and build authentic relationships. Like you need connection for that. And having town hall meetings sometimes doesn't do that. So, but going through an artistic process might do that. And so, sometimes again, it's not the best answer, but I do feel that, you have to look at what you've been doing historically and traditionally and say, okay, like we're not getting people at meetings, or people tend to go there. We want them here. Like go there with an artist, you know what I mean? So I feel like it's about evaluating what's been working for you, what might not have been working for you, and how in the ways that perhaps creative interventions can sort of fill in the gaps or create relationships with people that you might not have been able to do, in the standard engagement practices that have been going on for many years.
Great, thank you for that. I think you've given us some good tactical ways to move forward. Did someone else have something to add, or we will? But I'm excited for everyone on this call to be moving their own project forward, whether as an artist or starting a program at your watershed district or elsewhere. You can see the excitement and the passion amongst this group is really evident of what can happen when the work expands. So I truly thank you all for sharing your passion and your wisdom and your expertise here today. And I will turn it back over to Roxana.
Thank you all. Thank you all on behalf of the Forward publication. Just want to thank everyone for being here and for all of our speakers for really lifting up this issue in such a critical moment in which we really need to be talking about climate holistically. And I think that's definitely something that came to the forefront today. And we also hope that those of you on this call are considering how you might do more of this work. And so continue to learn more about all of their work. We dropped some websites in the chat, but also you can look at the publication, and we'll link out to this talk and other resources there. Read Forward, please. Learn more about all the great artists that are doing this. And just thank you to all the folks who support the publication, who support funding the publication. We may have some folks from the Minnesota State Arts Board here, who are one of the folks that support us. Thank you for that. There's a link to donate in the chat also if you want to support future conversations. And thanks again, just to all of our speakers. One final round of applause. I learned so much. Thanks to CAIR Lab. Thanks, Johanna. Appreciate it. All right, take care, y'all.